Hi, I'm Arthur, and this is part 8 in a 20-part series I am doing covering an in-depth look into the psychology of the Primarchs in Order of the Legions. Do you need to have seen the other parts to understand this one? No, but it would make me happy. Part 8, not accounting for the missing Primarch, leads us to the beautiful hawk boy Sanguinius, the Blood Angel himself, the one whom could do no wrong, cause no problems, and because of that is often maligned in the eyes of a lot of people, save for some of the more die-hard Blangels fans. Yes, I'm saying Blangels, I'm not taking that back. I like Sanguinius, I like what he stands for, but I understand more than anything why people wouldn't like him. He is a bit of a Christ-like figure, I would assume intentionally so, as the iconography of the Blood Angels is very much Catholic core, which is kind of cool. As someone who grew up Catholic, I do find the imagery does tend to go hard as hell from time to time. Like, I'm not much of a religious person by any stretch of the word right now, but I do enjoy studying various religious practices, and the Roman Catholic Church is just so responsible for most of the coolest iconography in 40K. Like, have you guys seen the reliquary of St. Mary? Yeah, that shit is real. Like as real as you can, actually go see it, but you know what I mean. But it contains a black skull and a golden statue preserved as a holy relic. This shit is the most 40K stuff you can get. So the entirety of the Blood Angels and Sanguinius adopted this as kind of their aesthetic, though that isn't without a reason behind it. So like with the other videos about the Primarchs, I have a lot to say about Sanguinius, but I have to narrow things down to only a few core ideas so it's not spread out too much. I could talk about every Primarch in many different ways, as most Primarchs are multifaceted in some way. So because of this, it's actually pretty easy to make a point about pretty much anything they have done. I could have totally just weighed in on Perturabo's weird Reddit-style tendencies to debate scholars about religion when he was a young lad, but I choose not to, as it's really not that big of a deal, and it's not that interesting. With Sanguinius, though, the main thing people tend to focus on is his level of perfection in the eyes of all the Primarchs. Like, he's stronger, better, faster, relatively smart, and most loved amongst the Primarchs, next to, say, maybe Horus before the shenanigans started to happen. But with Horus, he was playing the part of the diplomat, and with Sanguinius, he's just kind of a chill guy. Before we get into the weeds here, let me just break this down how I usually do in these. Give you the beginning, his backstory, the middle, how he is with his legion, and a little bit of his story, and the end, his death and the aftermath of its repercussions, and so on and so forth, as well as my conclusions on how I see him as a character. Okay? Cool. Let's go into the beginning. So the first thing that people would notice about Sanguinius... Hold up, Sanguinius? Man, I'm dyslexic on an almost mythical level at this point, bro. This shit isn't even funny anymore. But yeah, the first thing you will notice about Sanguinius... The first thing you notice about this Primarch is the giant-ass angel wings that are protruding from his back. And yeah, that's kind of a weird bit. Basically, as a child, he was sent to the moon of Ball Primus, known as Ball Secondus, because it's the second ball, which is kind of an important detail as it's an irradiated shithole where most things couldn't even live, to be honest. I know most Primarchs were sent to shitty planets, but Ball is definitely up there in the environmental hazards category, which is why he was either genetically programmed to have wings, or he grew them due to radiation, mutation, and warp magic that was likely on Ball. Because, fun fact, there's actually warp-resonant crystals on Ball, which are kinda cool, I guess. So, when you see a blood-red gem on a Blood Angel's neck, you know why that shit is kind of important to have. But regardless, he grew to massive proportions and did the whole Primarch thing, where he ended up being a benevolent ruler and uplifted his people out of the strife. He was a kind and gentle soul who knew how to lay a dude low if he needed to. Because, well, you know, Primarchs. Their defining factor is making a decision and sticking to it, even if it means getting into a conflict. They are conquerors by genetics. Comically enough, he was one of the more psychically gifted among the Primarchs, which leads him to be kind of a spoilsport for things like surprises and shit. Like, he legit could tell the Emperor was hiding amongst his people before he announced his presence, which is kind of funny. But yeah, a noble spirit, fair skin, blonde hair, red eyes, and giant wings. The man is an archetypal Catholic angel, which is kinda neat, but regardless, where next do we go from here? the middle. So what part did he play in his legion and the Horus Heresy? A pretty big one. See, unlike a lot of his other brothers, he himself is a bit of an oddity, where I don't think it would be bold of me to say that he had one of the biggest impacts on his legion in comparison to other Primarchs. So you know how the Blood Angels are casually just kind of vampire berserkers? Yeah, that was a lot worse before Sanguinius took hold. The legion prior to Sangi showing up was known as the Revenant Legion for a reason, and that reason was that they were a bunch of monster berserkers who would get the job done, but with no sense of tact or politeness. Bedside manner was never really taught to them, suffice to say. I know that Izander and Coda had a pretty fun way of describing them, so I don't want to steal their thunder. I'd recommend go watching their shorts and their podcasts and their episode about the Blood Angels. It's very fun. But in general, they would get their tasks done with a 100% sense of completion, but the aftermath would be a bit, not pretty. So Sanguinius showed up and actually showed them how to be noble, how to be kind, as well as how to suppress their violent urges. Weirdly enough, through artistic endeavors and also through their ability to learn, they were taught art, they were taught philosophy, they were taught they could engage in other mediums, other than, wanton slaughter, which is really sad. But the Blood Angels came from there, and I think it's a beautiful thing that they did. So they served in glorious combat with Sanguinius for a long-ass time until the Heresy broke out. And the Horus Heresy, as a series, is where you see most of his interactions with his legion, and why he's one of the greatest men to have ever lived. Every Primarch liked him. Even Kurz kind of liked him, which is insane because that freak likes no one, not even his own kids. But regardless, Sanguinius is burdened by the idea of doing what is right even when it isn't something that benefits him. It's kind of the polar opposite of Kurz in that matter, where he will see the future and know that something horrible is going to happen, but instead of giving in or giving up, he will commit to it and do it only if it meant that the outcome wouldn't forsake his noble intentions as well as his morals. See, Sanguinius is someone whom I think perfection isn't the right word to describe him. I think loved is better. He is a very loved character, and there are people like him I have met in my life, people who strive to do the most good in their life even if it was at a cost of a very negative outcome. And this is both a good and a horrible thing. There's a book I love reading. I tend to only go through it when I am having the worst time ever. It's kind of an essay and it's old as dirt, but it's called Happiness by Hugh Black. It's a weird long soliloquy about a bunch of random topics, and the story of as to how I ended up getting a copy of it is really funny and also incredibly convoluted. I was 14 and me and my parents moved into this new house, and it was hundreds of years old. It was a massive ancient log cabin that had been refurbished by an elderly couple, and they just had this massive library that had this book in it. It's a part of a series. I don't really touch upon those, but the book itself is kind of an essay about what it means to truly be happy and what are the various means in which people try to become happy. It's helped me through some dark times. And I can't help but think about several sections of the book that are dedicated to the idea of self-sacrifice in order to help others get through hard times. It's the smile that carries a family kind of mentality, which is the idea that I feel Sanguinius exemplifies quite a lot. He's put into this position where his moral compass is the most altruistic by default of all of his brothers, and because of this, he is always making a good impression on his brothers. Each of these individuals are chomping at the bit to impress him. He is a kind soul, but I can always feel that although it isn't performative, as the book I referenced earlier goes on to state, if you sacrifice your own happiness for others for too long, it can cause you to grow bitter. Which later into the heresy, there are several breaking points, several moments that are kind of at the expense of Sanguinius, which causes breaks in his psyche to form. And thus the Black Rage we know the Blood Angels have today begin its inception. It culminates in one of the greatest speeches in the Horus Heresy, and that is Sanguinius at the gates of eternity simply saying, "I don't want to be here," where he is basically acknowledging that he is at his breaking point, but he had to ride this wave out until its bitter end. And where did that lead him? To his death at the hands of his closest brother, Horus. The death of Sanguinius is one of the most well-known pieces of art from 40k. It's almost up there with the image of the Emperor on the throne. It's incredibly iconic. And because of this, it's one of the most impactful images you could ever see in the setting. His death led to the release of the Black Rage, as the psychic echo of him being murdered created the first Death Company-style Marines, as every single Blood Angel went into a berserking fury, seeing what he saw upon his death, which is a good metaphor for the buildup of anger and resentment being passed down through the generations because you refuse to deal with it yourself. There is this idea of being selfish, this idea of indulging in your own preferences that I find is too often demonized, and we prop up this idea of self-sacrifice to the point where moments like this are rather common in our world. Not like, super vampire angel killed by Mega Satan possessed super Lex Luthor, but refusing to invest in themselves until it's too late and they break down, causing more damage to themselves and others around them than if they would have just said no once or twice, or did something that only benefited them and no one else. The greater good is a good concept in a vacuum, but you can't burn yourself out on the idea of doing good for others for the sake of promoting some greater good. It's a topic I think that a lot of people can relate to, and I know that, especially right now, it's something that I can relate to more than I could ever convey in my words. And it's why so many people are divisive about Sanguinius. They think he is too perfect, when they don't realize that his sacrifice is to bleed out the rage that is built up in him over centuries. It's why, even though I'm not a huge fan of the Blood Angels, I do think that Sanguinius— God fucking damn! I do think that Sanguinius is one of my favorite Primarchs simply due to the idea of altruism and how it is represented, as even though he died a martyr, it still caused a lot of harm on the way out. But what do you all think? You think Sanguinius is a good representation of altruistic burnout? Or do you ascribe to the, he just isn't that great of a character kind of mentality? Let me know in the comments, as I like to hear what you all have to say. This is just my perspective, and though I have read a decent amount of the Horus Heresy, I'm still going through it, and there's still a few books that I need to read in order to better understand Sanguinius, so I could be completely off base, but this is my perception of him. Also remember to like and subscribe, as it helps the channel immensely. Special thanks to my channel members for supporting me, and if you want to support me as well as gain access to early or additional content, then become a channel member today. Thanks once again for watching. And before I go, I guess this is editor Arthur coming in last minute. I'm changing out the N-bit joke here because I just want to say I'm sorry that the video's coming out a little bit late. I'm looking at the timeline here and I'm already 3 hours past where I normally upload the videos today. This has been a very difficult week for me to get through, but hey, I got through it, and I'm gonna be back on track. Same time next week. I hope you all have a wonderful day. I hope you enjoyed the video. And yeah, best of luck with whatever you're doing.